So today we're meeting with Mandi Riddle. Mandi, how long have you been in business?
You know, I'm a licensed real estate agent, and I've been in business almost 9 years there, and that led into my property management business, which has been almost 6 years.
Okay. So with your business, I'm assuming you started it yourself.
I
Is that
did.
correct? What type of business organization did you originally start with?
I originally started with an LLC, just because that was simple. I knew it would take some liability off of me personally. And then after visiting with an accountant, we decided an S Corp was our best setup to maintain that I wasn't personally at risk, just my business assets were if something were to go awry, and also the tax benefits were definitely worth it in an S Corp.
What tax benefits did you see between the two?
Between the two, I was actually able to save on how much taxes I was paying for the federal. There's a different structure and setup to where I do draws, and they're just taxed differently. So it was a huge tax difference in what I was saving to switch.
Okay. Well, with your property manager, you mentioned that you've been for 6 years now. Do you have a particular specialization that you utilize within property management?
You know, I do both commercial and residential, but I only do up to 4 units on residential. I don't maintain any apartments or anything.
Okay, so 4 individual
Mm-hmm.
units. How many commercial units would you have then?
I have 2 different complexes, which are about 35 tenants between the two.
Okay, so quite a few.
Yeah.
Do you see any differences in the needs between residential and commercial tenants?
Yes, absolutely. Residential is much more hands-on. They require a lot more maintaining. Basically, you've got to just stay in communication, keep on top of them. A lot of the commercial just keep to themselves. You don't have to collect rent, go after rent monthly and all of that kind of thing. It's a better setup, a lot easier to maintain on the commercial setup.
Okay. What led you to go into these specializations?
It had to do with the market, taking a turn back in 2008 when I was selling homes, but some homes weren't selling, and the owners needed to do something. The homes were sitting vacant, they had payments they were making, so that's what led me into getting into property management, to help my sellers offset that payment and find them a renter.
So you essentially purchased the homes from your sellers in order to benefit them and yourself?
I didn't purchase them, I just simply went into the property management for them to get a renter in there.
So you just created the property management in order to assist them?
Correctly, yep.
Okay. With this, we mentioned just a minute ago that you also do real estate sales.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other type of diversification, or would you like to expound on that diversification?
Yeah, real estate has helped my property management business, and vice versa. Property management has helped the real estate. With real estate, I always have people coming to me that need a short-term rental. Maybe they're building, moving here from out of the area. So to be able to offer that service and find them a rental is huge. And also on the other side, like I said, when a seller's not able to sell their home and they need to find someone to live in their home or make their payment, that helps them as well. So they really lend themselves together well.
Have you ever noticed that with this diversification, you do get referrals from competitors?
Absolutely, yes. I am one of the main property managers in town from all the realtors. They refer me a lot of business, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've already gone over the number of units that you manage. Are they all here locally?
Yeah, pretty local. So I have 90 residential units, and they span from Hanson all the way to Buell, and then as far north as Jerome. I'd say majority of mine are in Twin Falls, but they do hit some of those surrounding areas as well. I don't go outside of those areas just simply because I can't do my job and maintain and watch them and do what's necessary to really do a good job. So I stay pretty local on that, and then the commercial stuff is in Twin and Jerome.
Okay. Now, with the diversification and the specializations, with these property units or residential units, is there a particular price range you like to focus in, or is it just whatever?
Honestly, there's not a price range. I do have everything, probably, I think my lowest one is $525 a month, up to $1,800 a month. So we do have a lot of executive rentals, which is good with the new companies coming to town. I can find them a place for their executives that are furnished, etc. But really, my main goal when finding a property that I want to manage is to interview the owner and make sure that they're on the same page as us. I want to make sure that they're going to do repairs that are needed and keep the property up to par. So it's not necessarily a price range other than making sure it's the right property.
Okay, that makes absolute sense. Do you utilize any on-site managers?
We don't. Those are usually used more for the apartment complexes, and where we don't manage those, we don't need them.
Okay.
So I do have, it's myself, and then I have an assistant that helps me.
Is there any Idaho requirements to have an on-site manager with any building?
There is not, no.
Okay. Do you find that a little odd in comparison?
I do. Idaho is very lenient. They hardly have any guidelines on property management. I think that's why you see a lot of companies out there. There is a lot of continuing education people can take to educate themselves, because property management is a unique business. But there are not actually any guidelines that we have to follow or that are required from Idaho.
So you mentioned continuing ed. Is there any requirement for continuing ed within property managers?
None. Again, with my real estate, I'm exposed to continuing education, and a lot of it is property management based. So I get a lot of stuff from there. There's attorneys in town that do classes and seminars, and I just highly suggest anyone takes those if they see an opportunity.
Absolutely. So with maintenance on the facilities, you said you had quite a few different facilities. How do you maintain them?
I have my main vendors that I use. I have a handyman that's solely Riddle properties. So he does all of my light, electrical, light, plumbing, excuse me, any of that kind of maintenance. He does a lot of the mowing as far as properties that include yard care. And then I have my standard HVAC, plumber, electrician on call that we just basically hire a job at if something gets done.
Are any of these people employees of your own?
Nope.
All independent
Yes.
contractors? Okay, so you actually have no other costs that you would incur?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any governmental requirements or licensures that you must abide by in Idaho?
There are none. I've heard talk about property management becoming, a license requirement, which is honestly not a bad idea. It's not happened yet, and like I said, I've only heard talk. I haven't seen anything come through. The only real thing that you have to worry about in any state really is fair housing, because you're not exempt from that regardless of whether you're licensed or not.
Okay. And what are the requirements of fair housing that you've
Just
seen?
basically can't discriminate. Definitely look up, and find out what those rules are as far as, not being able to discriminate. They do have testers out there that will call you and test, and they fine heavily if they find that you're discriminating.
Ever had one of those?
I've not. I've had test calls, but we've passed. So you have to be very careful.
Okay. So what, if any, insurance requirements are there?
There are no insurance requirements. I highly would recommend talking to your insurance company and getting a liability policy. It will save you if someone goes to sue your company, depending on if you've actually been at fault or not. A lot of that is covered with your insurance policy.
Okay. So do you have any?
I do, yes.
Okay. Do you mind going into any type of coverages that you may have?
I honestly leave that up to my guy. He's the expert, but it's very inexpensive. I mean, I want to say it's $350 a year for the amount of properties I manage, and that's just a no-brainer to protect yourself.
Absolutely. You ever had any experiences with eviction?
I have. I'm going to knock on wood that not very many. Most of the time what we do is we get to a situation where someone's situation has changed, they've lost their job, had medical issues, and they can't pay their rent. That's typically when you run into needing to evict someone. The time frame that's required allows them a lot of time to either get paid, caught up, or move out. That's typically what happens when you start that process. Either they're at a point where they can come up with the funds and get paid. Sometimes you just have to threaten them. Other times they're just not going to be able to do that, and they move out before court. I've gone through one full eviction, and it wasn't that hard. Honestly, the people were in the process of moving out, but we had started all the steps and decided to go ahead and go through with it. And you have to have a court order as far as eviction goes in order to go back and try to claim what they owe against you. So you have to go through that process if you're going to try to collect some rent.
Could you walk me through that process, including the time frame?
Yes. In Idaho, you as a property manager actually can guide the owner, but the owner has to be the one that files and shows up in court, unless they hire an attorney. So that is something that people need to keep in mind, is that property manager can only guide them so far. Basically, you have to sign it or provide a 3-day pay or quit to the tenant. You either have to have proof that you've done it or have them sign it. Then you take that down. The owner has to fill out some paperwork and file with the court. I think it's $78. They will then order a date for the court, and then you have to serve them or hire the sheriff's department to serve them. And then you go to court. The judge comes out with a ruling, and after that, if you want to proceed, you have to make sure that they're off within. They usually have 3 days after that, and you have to have a sheriff escort them if they're not there. I'm not completely savvy with it because, like I said, I haven't really had to do it, but that's usually the process.
How long did your last one take?
It was, I'd say start to finish was probably 20 to 22 days. Again, we didn't have to actually escort them off the property because they were in the process of moving out.
Okay. Have you ever had any experiences with tenant complaints?
Yes, all the time. You honestly just need to train your tenants on what's acceptable to complain about and what's not. It also depends on their personality. Some of them will complain about everything and some you won't hear a thing from. So that has a lot to do with it. A lot of times you just get piddly things like, you know, the neighboring property has animals that are annoying, or there's someone parking in their parking spot. Mostly very minor complaints.
How much of your week do you think that takes up?
Complaints, I would say I probably get anywhere from 5 to 7 calls a week on complaints.
Okay. Cool. So what experience have you had with tenants that might have some unusual requirements?
You know, you learn new stuff every day. I would say we're seeing an epidemic of companion animals or companion pets, which is something you cannot discriminate based off of fair housing. And all they have to do is have a doctor's letter. But to even ask them for that doctor's letter, you're getting close to that line of discriminating. So if someone comes in and says they have a companion pet, that doesn't mean that pet's gone through training. It doesn't mean they're not going to harm the house. You cannot charge an additional pet deposit. It is a scary thing. And there's no, you would think a pet meant a dog or a cat. It can be a snake, a rat, a ferret, it doesn't matter. So you just want to be really careful. If they're not the best fit for the property to start with, you can deny them based off of other things, but you cannot deny someone based off of having a companion pet.
So what experiences have you had with security deposits?
You know, security deposits, those get sticky because, you know, you just want to make sure that your lease is very clear as to what they have to do to get that back. A lot of my tenants get full thing back. When someone gives notice, I give them a list of items I expect to be done with the walkthrough that we do.
Okay.
And we take pictures from the beginning, from when they move in to when they move out. So we are able to document it, and that helps our job. It makes it easier because we can show them, no, this was definitely something you did. But there's always going to be those tenants that don't agree with some repairs that you felt were necessary that you withhold from their deposit. So, you know, it just goes with the job description, unfortunately.
Who makes the ultimate decision of what is basic wear and tear and what is not wear and tear?
You know, the owners usually leave that up to the property manager. Sometimes I will get an owner, if they're a local owner, I'll get them in there if they want, you know, some are more hands-on, and I'll get their opinion. Wear and tear doesn't seem to be that much of an issue. It usually is something that's specifically damaged that you can prove.
Okay. What about late payments? We mentioned evictions earlier. How many experiences or how common is that of having an experience with late payments?
Very common. In our policy, rent is actually due on the 1st, but not late until the 5th. We believe everyone needs a grace period. You know, everyone's paychecks fall on a different date. However, people then assume the 5th is their due date, and if they bring it on the 6th, they want an extension and not have to pay the late payment. So you've really just got to come up with a policy and stick with it, because if you give an exception to one tenant, then the next one's going to expect it. So I'd say we deal with probably 3 to 5 late payments every month where we're calling and hounding someone to bring in their rent.
Do you see a difference between residential and commercial with regard to late payments?
Absolutely, but also the fact that commercial doesn't necessarily have a late payment structure. A lot of leases do not actually enforce a specific late payment like a residential lease does. So I do think mostly commercial pays on time, and I don't ever have issues collecting rent with the tenants that I have. With residential, you definitely see a lot more of that.
Okay. Now, what would you warn a new property manager to be concerned with about tenants?
Oh, it's tough. You start out thinking you're the nice guy and you want to throw someone a bone, and they take advantage of it and they run. So you really have to be careful. There's a fine line between being compassionate and understanding that everyone runs into circumstances out of their control, and also realizing that it's your job to make sure this property is taken care of and that they're paying their rent on time. So it is really a fine line that people have to learn how to walk.
Okay. So essentially just make sure you don't get taken advantage of.
Yes. It happens easily, so.
So what do you think property managers should learn before even starting in that property management?
You know, I definitely think every property manager should talk to an accountant and an attorney, and they'll have definitely the most guidance for them. Making sure that you have the correct paperwork in order, your leases are the way they need to be, so that you're fully covered. Your agreements with your owners, you need to make sure that you're fully covered there, and that would be a good start. But it's honestly a learning experience. I learn something new every day on this business, and so you just not everyone's cut out to be a property manager. So I think people find that out sooner than later.
So, and then this is our last question: is what is your best and your worst experience within property management?
Best experience would be, I mean, I've got quite a few tenants that actually have become friends. They've become clients who've moved on and purchased houses from me. It's just been really good. Was a really positive experience from the get-go. The worst that definitely stands out would be, unfortunately, a gal had rented a home. It was an older home that had a cellar basement. She lifted the door to the cellar to move some boxes down there, and in the meantime had forgot she had opened it apparently and stepped back and actually died from her injuries. I mean, it was terrible. I knew her personally, so we had to deal with that. And then on top of that, we ended up getting sued from the family, just because they were suing the owner, but because I'm the manager, I get pulled into that lawsuit. And so, even though it was no one's fault, in my opinion, it was just, a really sad accident. That is, when you're in property management, you are putting yourself at risk for lawsuits.
So how did you handle that situation? Were you going to have money out of pocket?
Thankfully the insurance has so far covered. I think if they were able to prove negligence on someone's part, it would be a different story, but all of the attorney's fees and everything so far have been covered as part of the insurance.
Well, I appreciate your time. I will talk to you sometime soon.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.